Okay, I am going to call the meeting to order. This is the Town of Long Beach Advisory Board of Zoning Appeals regular meeting. Tuesday, July 14th, 2020, 7 p.m. We're a few minutes beyond 7 p.m. We're at the Long Beach Community Center Gymnasium. The BZA members, the Building Commission member, and our attorney. And everyone else is joining us, petitioners and public, via the Zoom conference. So I want to welcome you all to today's meeting. The Town of Long Beach's zoning code imposes restrictions officially determined by the Town Council to be necessary to protect the interests of the community as a whole. The Board of Zoning Appeals is a response to the fact that it is almost impossible that a set of regulations affecting the development of land could be universally applied. The BZA provides a venue for property owners with unique conditions related to their parcels who are seeking relief from the strict requirements of the zoning code. It is the role of the BZA to perform the public function of protecting the public interest while facilitating improvements and investments in a manner that is consistent with the intent of the zoning code. So, with that said, I will turn to our secretary, Meg Collins, and ask her to please call the roll.
Chairman Michael Gordon. Chairman Michael Gordon.
Here.
We cannot hear Meg.
And Meg, yeah, I can't hear you.
I think she's muted.
Oh, okay.
Start
Make sure
over.
you unmute yourselves.
Chairman Michael Gorman.
Here.
Board members Doug Wickstrom.
Here.
Meg Canier. Here. Barb Morgan.
Here.
Rich Jurkic.
Here.
BZA Counsel Chris Willoughby. BZA Secretary Meg Collins. I am present. Building Commission Representative Bob LeMay.
Here.
That concludes roll.
Okay, thank you. We have a quorum, so we shall proceed. If everyone present and all you folks on Zoom, if you would please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. We have a flag up on the stage. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. With that, we will move on to the approval of minutes. Board members all have had an opportunity to review the minutes from our last meeting, the June 16th, 2020 regular meeting. Is there a motion to approve those minutes? Motion by Ms. Canier, second.
I'll second.
Second by Doug Wickstrom. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. So that those minutes are adopted. Thank you. Old business, new business, we have none on the agenda. We will move on to the one item listed under preliminary hearings, and that is Thomas King, 2301 Florimond Drive, 4 separate administrative decision appeal petitions appealing the decision of the Building Commission's January 15, 2020 issuance of a building permit for the construction of the seawall at 4 properties along Lakeshore Drive. We opened the preliminary hearing at our last meeting. Those petitions were all referred to the town council. So I'm going to turn to our attorney, Chris Willoughby, for him to give us an update as to where those petitions currently sit.
At this point, the town council has referred it to the previously named special BZA, as well as I believe Dr. LeMay has been in touch with counsel, which is David Austin, who serves as counsel for the BZA, given that I had a previous conflict. And so at this point, it is out of the purview of this body as currently constituted.
So do you know how will these petitions progress now?
At this point, I'm out of the loop. So they procedurally and generally, they will proceed at the leisure and/or direction of the special BZA and with the guidance of their counsel.
Okay, I guess maybe on behalf of the BZA, I'll just ask our building commission representative, Bob LeMay, who happens to also be a town president, just to endeavor to make sure that the public receives notice of the meetings of the special BZA for people who are interested in following these 4 administrative decision appeal petitions from Mr. King. So thank you. Okay, so those are off our agenda, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, so now we will move on to public hearings. We have 4 public hearings scheduled for this evening. The first public hearing is Kevin and Jocelyn Cruz, 2027 Oriole Trail. It is for a developmental standard variance petition requesting variances from the requirements of Section 154-057, Schedule of District Regulations concerning setbacks, and Section 154-134, non-conforming residential dwelling alteration permitted. Mr. Cruz first appeared before the BZA in October of 2019. We had a number of preliminary hearings. We had a number of postponements at Mr. Cruz's request. BZA also did not meet in March, April, and May. Mr. Cruz's petition was up for a public hearing at the last meeting. He did not meet the requirements in order to proceed with the public hearing, so his public hearing was postponed till today. Mr. Cruz, are you with us?
Yes, I am.
I will turn to our secretary. As the petitioner met the requirements to open a public hearing. Are you unmuted?
The petitioner has not met all of the requirements. The sign was posted, the legal fees were paid, but the notice to neighbors within 300 feet return receipt cards were not submitted to the clerk's office.
That's not true. They were dropped off this morning
There are some things that should be
at the
worked out
clerk's office.
part of the community.
Where did you drop them?
There are
I had
circumstances
a,
that will necessitate.
my counsel dropped them off at Deanna's office this morning.
Go to
Where did he leave them though? Like in the water box or?
No, he was to call her and let her know because we had them collected from, way back when, but I talked with him last night to make sure that they would be delivered prior to the meeting, and that's what he was supposed to do this morning.
Okay.
Well,
I called her at 3 p.m. She did not receive anything. So I'm not sure what happened, but
There is somebody that has an open microphone and they're having a great conversation that's impeding what we're hearing on our end here.
yes,
I think it's an iPhone somewhere. They need to mute.
thank you. Yes, would everybody please mute their speakers on their devices? So, Mr. Cruz, you
Yes.
are telling us that your attorney told you today that he delivered them to the clerk.
Yes, that was when I spoke with him last night. That was going to happen this morning, that they were all collected, the ones that came back to us. And they were going to be dropped off this morning at the town hall with Deanna at about 10 o'clock.
And
So I haven't heard anything other than that. So this is news to me because we've gotten everything in place and we sent the letters out like we were supposed to. So I don't know what happened.
and the attorney that you used is whom?
Al Cernick. He was the one that originally drafted all the letters, had everything ready to go. And they came back to him. I talked to him yesterday afternoon. He said that they had collected a bunch of them and that they were going to bring them in this morning.
So, Mr. Saranac, your attorney told you he was doing that, drafting the letters, preparing them. You signed the letters?
Yes.
When approximately did you do that? Like
Jeez.
3 weeks ago, or, you know?
Yeah. It was, a while ago, and they were sent out within a reasonable amount of time. We've got some responses back. Had neighbors come up to me in front of the house and said they got the letters. So I know the letters went out, and I know we were getting responses.
Put it in the water box. Check it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can follow up with them, after this phone call, but I know that we have the receipts for the letters.
No, I think that's what I'm trying to establish, that you, in fact, did what you were supposed to do, although it's against the backdrop of you not doing it before the last meeting. So, it was supposed to have been done once and it wasn't done. And now I'm taking your word that it was done this time. I mean, I would like to move forward with this. You've been in front of us for a long time.
Oh, I agree.
The problem is our secretary talked to Deanna, the assistant town clerk, at 3 o'clock, and she didn't have anything. Well, so you've Mr. Willoughby, if I take the petitioner's word here, he seems to be fairly...
Listen, I'll take the day off of work tomorrow and do it if I have to. I'll bring him in myself.
Would it perhaps be in order to kick him to the back of the line and maybe give him the opportunity to try to figure it out this evening?
Yeah, I can give him a call right now.
It's dangerous ground to take a word for it. Any decision that could be made could be subject to him providing that proof.
Okay, let's do that for the moment. We'll hold off on your public hearing for the moment. And if you would come back on, give him a call and see if you can raise him the best you can, and come back to us and find out exactly what he did with those registered letter receipts, where he did.
No problem.
Who he gave them to, and so forth. Okay.
I'll do that right now. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. All right. So we will not open the Cruz public hearing. We will hold off on that and bring him back hopefully later in the meeting. So we will move on to the second public hearing. And that is Patrick and Rebecca McCusker, 2208 Chastleton Drive. It is a developmental standard variance petition requesting 2 variances from the requirements of 154-051B, permitted accessory uses and structures, and section 154-130, non-conforming buildings and structures. Petitioner is requesting to construct a shed as an accessory structure. Preliminary hearing was opened on June 16th, and the public hearing is set to open today. And I will turn to our secretary and ask if the McCusker petition has met the requirements to declare the public hearing open.
All requirements have been met.
Thank you. I will just make a statement which will apply to all of our public hearings. The public hearing is judicial in nature, and as such, it is conducted in a formal manner. So we will be following a specific format for all of the public hearings. And first is the requirements, which you have met, so thank you. I'll now call on the petitioner to state his or her case. We have all the documents you filed, but this is your opportunity to explain your situation and what you are seeking. So go ahead.
Yes, this is Rich Trainer, counsel for petitioners. This petition is in order to build a shed, an accessory structure in the rear yard. Petitioner's lot is a residential single non-conforming lot of record. The lot size per the survey is 11,475 square feet. Therefore, under Appendix A, the maximum zoning lot coverage, 35%, would be 4,016.25 feet. The proposed accessory structure is 14 by 12 or 168 square feet. So the total coverage, including the 14 by 12 accessory structure, is 3,522 square feet, which is well under the maximum lot coverage requirement. The structure will be at least 10 feet from the side and rear lot lines. The total difference in square feet between the 1% and the proposed shed is 54 square feet, and I would submit that that's a de minimis amount. I've also turned in letters from the homeowners on either side, on Chastleton, either side of petitioner's home, and the two houses across the street, as well as the house and the lot behind on Floorman, and all none of them have any objection, and they speak in favor of granting the variance. I believe that the requirements, the developmental standard variance requirements are met here. This project is going to be similar to other sheds in the neighborhood, sheds that are on the parcels behind petitioner's property. And the construction will be in compliance with the town building code. It's an improvement to the property. It's in keeping with the general characteristics of the neighborhood. The size of the shed is necessary. I think I alluded to this at the last meeting. The petitioners have 5 children. The size of the shed, the 14 by 12 is a standard shed size. And in this case, it's large enough to accommodate 5 children's bicycles, beach gear, golf clubs, everything that they, need to store. Based on the fact that there's no objections from the neighbors, the fact that it's allows them to use the property in the same manner that others in the neighborhood do, and it's consistent with the requirements of the ordinance, I'd ask that you grant the variance.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Trainer. Okay, moving on. I will now call for any person who are on this Zoom call here to speak in favor of the petition. Okay, looks like no one's speaking up. So I will ask our secretary, do we have any letters in favor of the petition?
We do have letters in favor, and I will read them. The first is from Annabella Juhas and Cleo Brodsky of 2208 Florimond Drive. Members of the Long Beach BZA, I am a neighbor of the McCuskers and do not have any objection to them installing a shed in their backyard as they are proposing on their variance request. There are 4 more letters that state this same paragraph that I will read, and those 4 letters were submitted by Timothy Hanley of 2211 Chastleton Drive, Donald and Anne Marie Deegan of 2212 Chastleton Drive, Mary Wilson and Ann Perry of 2209 Chastleton Drive, and June Ruby of 2206 Chastleton Drive. The letter from those 4 homeowners reads, members of the Long Beach BZA, I am a neighbor of the McCuskers and am supportive of them installing a shed in the corner of their backyard. I recognize they are asking for a variance whereby their shed will cover 1.5% of their property and not the 1% which is called for in the building code. But I believe this will be an appropriate size shed for their property and will continue to maintain the aesthetic character of our town.
Thank you, Meg. Those were letters in favor of the petition. I will now call for any people who are on this Zoom call who wish to speak in opposition to the petition. Looks like we have silence, so no one in opposition. Do we have any letters in opposition, Meg?
We do not.
No letters in opposition. Okay, thank you. At this point, I am declaring that the public hearing is now closed for public comment. Let me call on our Building Commission representative, Bob LeMay, and ask him if he has anything he wants to add for our consideration.
The McCuskers didn't come to the Building Commission with this permit, so the only comments I have is from my review. And in my review, I believe that there is a right-of-way behind the McCuskers property, and 154.052 in our ordinances suggests that a accessory structure needs to be at least 30 feet from a right-of-way. So I would, to kind of facilitate this process, it seems to me that they ought to be asking for a variance from 154.052 also. Otherwise, I'm afraid what might happen is they would get a variance here and then come to the Building Commission and be turned down.
Thank you. Is there anything further?
That's it.
Okay, thank you. Yes.
Could I respond to that?
No. Look, no, I'm sorry. I was talking to Mr. Trainer. Go ahead. Yes, she covered that at the beginning. That's okay. Okay, at this point, I will turn to the BZA members for discussion regarding this petition for the sake of all present and those in the audience. After our discussion, there are three options for the BZA. One is to approve there are two variances requested here. To approve the two variances, to deny the two variances, or any combination thereof, or to continue this meeting if the members on the BZA feel that they've heard something tonight or they need more information to make a decision. So with that, let me turn to the BZA members and open it for your discussion. Barbara, you got to get by somebody's computer. Barbara Morgan has a malfunctioning device, so I think you're going to have to get somehow. Well, I don't know. I'd like people to hear what you have to say.
We cannot hear this person that's speaking.
I know. No, be patient. It's hard to hear you. Can you? Wait.
You need to unmute her. Because of the sound, are they going for both variances? Both the size of their shed and the setback?
What happened here?
Are you asking that? No, they are not asking for a setback variance. As you can see from all the papers they submitted, they are asking for a variance from the size of the shed and a variance to permit them to build a shed on a non-conforming property.
Okay, so that other element is still out there.
It's not in front of us. We do not have a variance request for a setback in front of us. As you may recall, at the last meeting, which was the preliminary hearing, we had a decent discussion about this with the petitioner and his counsel. And one of the things we said at conclusion of that is we gave them the opportunity to consider the setback and decide whether they wanted to amend their petition for that, and they chose not to.
So then it would go by the laws of the land.
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay, thank you.
Who else would like to express their views or thoughts about what's being annexed there? Mr.
Even if the lot was conforming,
the lot was conforming, even a conforming lot, you're what, 120 square feet?
Your device is obviously not, we're not picking up your sound, I guess.
Yeah.
We're having some technical difficulties, so I apologize.
Okay, Richard. My question was, even if it's a conforming lot, the size of the shed would be 120 square feet. They're still asking for 168 square feet, which is a significant percentage above what our ordinances state. I have some concern on that, based on what they're looking for and looking for practical difficulties.
We're having a really hard time hearing the gentleman speaking.
We'll see what we can do.
We're trying to address difficulties here.
How's that? Try again. Even if it's conforming property, the size of the lot, the size of the shed would be 140 square feet, and you're asking for 168. It's a significant deviation from the ordinance. I understand you got a lot of stuff, but that's 40% more than what our.
I'm sorry. We still can't hear the gentleman speaking.
Hey, Bob. I think.
Wait, we're not taking, this is a board discussion. This is not public. The public comment section is closed.
It has nothing to do with public. You're all sitting too close together. That's why we can't hear
Oh,
you.
thank you for the help.
What?
Your iPhone is your iPhone over there to be off? Sorry, my mom.
Well,
What we can try to do.
coming over here, Terry. All right. Okay, is everybody able to hear me when I speak? Apparently not. Are people able to hear me when I speak?
Yes.
Are people going to get tired of hearing me if I'm the only one speaking?
We can hear you. No, we're not tired.
Mr. Norton, you have a great audio feed. It's perfect. However, when you have other microphones open next to you, it makes it very difficult for everybody that's on Zoom to hear what is being said. I might suggest, if you allow me,
Yes.
if Mr. Jursich has something that he would like to say in this meeting, that possibly you step away from your computer 6 or 8 feet, whatever your rules say, let Mr. Jursich come over, sit in front of your computer and make his statement so that everybody can hear his opinions and thoughts. Thank you, I'm out.
You want to try that, Rich? Yeah, come on, try mine. So for some reason, mine seems to work the best right now.
You're gonna get everybody.
I think it had to do with Meg's speaker on her computer and yours not at the same time. How close you are.
Okay.
It just has to do with the volumes on the actual.
Okay, how's that?
Yep, we can hear you now.
It's perfect.
It's perfect.
My concern was, even if your property was a conforming lot, you know, say the largest structure then would be 120 square feet, and you're asking for 168 square feet based on, you know, I have 5 bicycles, and I do appreciate you have 5 kids, but that's a large percentage over what our ordinances call for.
But this is a BZA discussion at this point, Rich, unless you need to hear something from the petitioner, you can call on him. Is there any reaction to what Rich is saying?
My concerns are the same as Rich. We talked to some of the ordinances, 1%. And
Nobody in the world has enough room for their stuff. I concur with that.
Okay. As I said at the last meeting, the ordinance is pretty clear. We didn't write the ordinance. We were just here to enforce the ordinance, and the ordinance says 1%, and the shed that's being requested is 46% larger than 1%. So that's, to Mr. Jursik's point, that's quite a difference. And we have the ability to exercise our discretion to grant the variance. And I think the test is the third prong of the state requirements, and that is are there practical difficulties? Does the zoning code cause practical difficulties for the use of this property? Well, it's, you know, in I don't see that standard being met here. So I have a little bit of difficulty with granting the variance. I personally have no problem in the variance to build a shed, okay, to give a variance for the non-conforming property. I mean, you know, he's got a lot that's a little too small for the area, but his lot's been there for a long time. The zoning code came well after his property was there already. So I favor the granting of the variance to build the shed, but I would be, unless I hear something else, you know, I'm not in favor of the variance to have the shed larger than the code requires. Any other discussion by the board?
Is the petitioner allowed to speak yet or no?
No, we'll ask you if we need your comments. You want to come over here? Yeah, try yours.
I offer a couple of thoughts. One, I guess, is I find the fact that all the surrounding neighbors have expressed support for this compelling, and that's worth something. The other thing that I would add to the perspective that Rich has stated is there's no mention of any other avenues that were explored to provide this kind of storage. And an accessory building may not be the only way to do it. And so that is a question, just something that pops to mind. There could be an addition to the house. There could be other types of approaches to this, and that's not been mentioned as being explored.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else have discussion? If not, then we have 3 options before us: to approve, deny, or to continue this public hearing. Do I hear anybody making a appropriate motion?
I'll make a motion. We go to your.
Yeah, I guess that would work out best. Rich Jursik wants to make a motion. He will come to my computer.
You turn your respond or no?
No. I'd like to make a motion to,
Let me just step back. Let me clarify for everybody. In order to make a motion to approve or deny a variance under our rules and under state law, we need to have findings and decisions on 3 particular points. One is the variance being requested in contrary to public good, public health, and so forth. Second, does it have a negative impact on neighboring properties? And third is, does the zoning code provide practical, difficult, without the variance, does the zoning code provide practical difficulties in the use of this property? So we are required to answer those questions in order to approve or deny a variance. So we have a particular form that we use to address those state requirements, and I think that's what Rich is going to do.
The request from the petitioners was to request developmental standard variance from sections 154.051B and 151.130 for the purpose of constructing a shed on their non-conforming lot. The contemplated project would include a floor area of the shed that would exceed 1% of the size of their zoning lot and result in the enlargement or alteration of a non-conforming structure in a way that increases its non-conformity due to the size of the petitioner's lot, all of which is generally prohibited under sections 154.051B and 151.30 respectively. The Long Beach Advisory Board of Zoning Appeals, after giving due consideration to the petitioner's petition for standard development variances, supporting documents, testimony, and evidence presented during the public hearing on the subject petition, other materials presented to the BZA that are part of the public record, and the legal requirements set forth under the Indiana and Long Beach codes, the BZA now makes the following findings. 1, for relief sought by petitioners under section 154.051B, petitioners have failed to establish that the strict application of the Long Beach zoning code will result in practical difficulties in the use of their property. 2, for relief sought by petitions under section 154.130, A, the approval of the requested development standard variance from the town's general restriction against permitting the enlargement or alteration of a non-conforming structure in a way that increases its nonconformity due to the size of petitioner's lot will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare, because the contemplated project will be constructed in a manner similar to other projects and improvements that exist or that have otherwise been allowed in and around the immediate vicinity of the subject property, and all construction will be in compliance with applicable provisions of the town's building code. B, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property subject to the requested development standard variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner because the project involves updating and improving the property while maintaining its general compatibility with the character of the immediate neighborhood. C, the strict application of the Long Beach zoning code will result in practical difficulties in the use of the subject property for which this development standard variance is sought, because the subject property, like many throughout the community, is a non-conforming lot. As a result of the non-conformance, the petitioners would not otherwise be able to make the contemplated improvements or use and enjoy their property in the same manner as other property owners that are similarly situated without receiving approval for the requested development standard variance. All relief granted by the BZA for the subject petition should be only under section 154.130 of the zoning code, as no other relief from any other sections is properly before the BZA for consideration. Based on the foregoing findings, as well as due regard for the requirements of both state and local laws, it is the decision of the BZA to, 1, deny the requested standard development variance from the requirements of section 154.051B that would allow petitioners to construct a shed with a floor area that would exceed 1% of the size of their zoning lot, and 2, approve and grant the requested standard development variance from the requirements of section 154.130 to allow the petitioners to construct a shed on their non-conforming lot subject to the following determinations and/or conditions. 1, the standard development variance is granted as relief only from section 154.130 of the zoning code. B, no part of these findings and decisions shall be deemed to include any consideration or determination regarding any other section of the zoning code, including as no relief under any other section was requested of or otherwise properly before the BZA for consideration as part of the subject petition. And C, petitioners must obtain all required applicable permits, including but not limited to a building permit prior to the commencement of any work, all of which shall be based on and subject to the drawings and plans submitted to the BZA for consideration under the petition.
So we have before us a motion by Mr. Jurczyk to approve the variance based on the non-conforming nature of the lot and to deny the variance based on the size of the shed. Do we have a second to that motion? Anyone care to make a second to the motion?
Second.
A second by Daniel. Is there any discussion by the board over this motion? Okay, hearing none, I will turn to our secretary, Meg Collins, and ask her to please call the roll.
Rich Jurczyk.
Aye.
Barb Morgan.
Aye.
Doug Wickstrom.
Aye.
Meg Canier.
Aye.
Mike Gorman.
Aye. The motion passes based on a 5-0 vote. And that concludes our public hearing for 2208 Castleton. We will now move on to the next public hearing. Yes, we will. Mr. Cruz, are you back with us?
Yes.
Anything you want to share with us?
Yes, my wife is waiting outside in front there, waiting for him to drop them off.
Your wife is outside.
I'm very livid right now. That's all I'm going to say.
Is your wife outside the building here? The
Yeah.
community center? Okay, we saw her.
She's waiting on him to drop them off. I got a hold of him, and it's just I'm glad he's not in front of me.
Yeah, all right. We are, no,
The attorney is going to drop.
so your wife does not have them yet, okay.
No, she's out there waiting for him. She's going to walk him in. She's got a mask. She's,
Okay,
yes.
okay. Okay, you can come back to us later in the meeting.
Thank you.
We'll hold it open one more time for you.
I appreciate it.
Okey doke. All right. Okay, here we go. Let's move on to the next public hearing. And that is Scott and Brandy Up, 2116 Lakeshore Drive. It's a developmental standard variance petition requesting 2 variances from the requirements of 154-2033, permissible shoreline preservation structures and specifications concerning the installation of a side seawall, and section 154-057, schedule of district regulations concerning side setback. Petitioner is requesting to install a side seawall that extends into the side setback by more than 3 feet. Preliminary hearing was opened at the June 16th BZA meeting. The public hearing is set to open at today's meeting. I'll turn to Meg Collins, our secretary, and ask if the requirements to open a public hearing have been met.
The requirements have been met.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I'll call upon the petitioner to state his case for the BZA for the record.
For the record, this is Richard Trainer on behalf of Scott and Brandy Up and Upside LLC. Just briefly, the seawall that's in question here extends across the frontage of both the McGee and Up, who are the 2 petitioners, across the frontage of their property. This seawall was a legally existing protection structure prior to the enactment of the waterfront overlay ordinance. In the winter of 2019, end of 2019 and beginning of 2020, there were a series of severe storms on Lake Michigan, which caused a catastrophic failure of the seawall. The building commission granted an emergency building permit with the condition that after the construction was completed, that the petitioner would seek a variance. In connection with that building permit, the Indiana Department of Natural Resources approved the construction per the drawings. The Army Corps of Engineers also approved the construction and issued a permit. The engineering drawings were approved on February 14th, I believe, 2020 by the Building Commission. Construction commenced, some parties objected, and the Building Commissioner issued a certificate of imminent peril in February of 2020, where that's part of the record in this case, where he found the situation to be such that there was imminent danger of destruction of property of the real estate in front of the house, the house, possibly Lakeshore Drive, if construction were to be halted at that point. Right here in this petition, Mr. and Mrs. Up were seeking 2 variances, as stated, for the 3-foot, greater than 3-foot intrusion into the side setback, and also the 3-foot from the foundation requirement of the ordinance. The key here is that the old seawall that was constructed when these houses were built in 2017, I believe, had return walls that stopped at the lakefront side of the residence. The return wall did not tie in to anything. It did not, more particularly, it did not tie into the what's been called the WPA wall that runs east-west across the Up and McGee parcels and is effectively underneath their houses. Their houses are constructed over that 1973 wall. The key here is that the return wall failed in the storms of 2020 and late 2019 because that return wall did not tie into anything. The water got behind the return wall and caused failures of the return wall, loss of the land in front of the house, and threatening imminent loss of the 2 structures themselves. The affidavit of Mr. Tungate, who is the engineer who did the work is attached and is part of the record. And he indicates in that affidavit that this return wall must tie in to the east-west wall. If it does not, there's no point in building the seawall because it will fail again when the circumstances are such that the water gets in between the house and the end of the return wall, just as it did in January and February 2020. And so what we're looking at essentially is a variance for that last bit of return wall is measured on the survey that I had a blow up of the survey attached is the exhibit to the hearing. You could look at it. It's number 6, and it defines the distance between the end of the old return wall and the WPA wall. The distance that is an issue here with respect to the up residence on the west side is 6 feet. So that's what we're talking about here, is that 6 feet. The ordinance itself, 154-2033, allows a 3-foot intrusion into the setback. And this variance just seeks, we're seeking a variance to cover the distance in excess of that 3-foot intrusion. But it does not involve, the variance here is not with respect to the entire return wall. It's very important. The return wall existed up to the front of the house prior to its failure. This repair involves tying the return wall to the 1973 WPA wall. If it's not allowed, if the variance should be allowed, and it was, the permit was issued by the Building Commission of Long Beach per engineering drawings that were approved. The Indiana Department of Natural Resources approved it. The United States Army Corps of Engineers approved it. And by the way, the DNR indicated that the seawall was leeward of the ordinary high water mark in the permit, which is part of the exhibits that you have before you. The project is in compliance with the town building code, and it was constructed in a manner such as other seawalls in the area have been constructed. And 154-206 allows for the repair or replacement of legally pre-existing protection structures. The area will not affect the adjoining property in an adverse way. Quite the opposite. It's preserving the integrity of the adjoining property. It's preventing continued erosion of the shoreline and protects the area adjacent to the up property and the McGee property. And, quite frankly, granting this will keep these houses from further damage or possibly total destruction. That would have an adverse effect on adjoining property owners, as well as the town of Long Beach should the road become in jeopardy due to lack of a return wall on the seawall. Strict application of the ordinance it will result in practical difficulties for the reasons I've mentioned. The property is in imminent danger of erosion and collapse unless the seawall is allowed as constructed, particularly the return wall tying into the 1973 wall. Mr. Up, in good faith here, built this seawall in reliance upon the grant of the building permit, the approved engineering drawings, approved by the town of Long Beach, approved by DNR.
Mr. Trainer.
Yes.
Can I interrupt you?
Yes.
Your variance requests a variance with respect to only the extensions at the end of the seawalls, correct?
That's correct, but it involves two different ordinances.
Could you please keep your comments and discussion to that extension only, and you keep talking about the entire seawall, and that's not at issue, that's not before us. So
Okay, that's true.
please wrap up your comments.
I will. But if the seawall is not extended, it will fail. To that extent, it involves the entire seawall. That's why I'm talking about. That's why the last 6 feet is so important to the integrity of the whole thing. And that's why I brought it up. Also would note that the return wall is on the property line. It's more than 6 feet from the side setback under the ordinance. It had to be because it runs from the end of the seawall, that runs across the property. Couldn't get any closer to the house than 6 feet because of the nature of the equipment and what's involved in the sheet piling operation. It could not be 3 feet from the side of the house. They couldn't get the equipment any closer than that, than the 6 feet, which ends up being on the property line.
Is that all?
That's it.
Let me, before we move on, just to clarify one point, at the preliminary hearing, you withdrew the request for a variance from 154-057?
I don't know. No, I didn't intentionally withdraw because I think it's still at play here. We discussed it, but I didn't formally withdraw. The property, to the extent that return wall is more than or greater than 6 feet on the setback, I'm still asking for that.
Okay, I understand that. Mr. Willoughby, you understand, we did have this discussion at the preliminary hearing. The council did withdraw the variance, so it is not something I was considering, but it is kind of hand in glove, the two together. Do you have any problem with him continuing to pursue both of these variances?
I don't. They've been advertised.
Right. Right. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear. Thank you. Okay, at this point, I will call for any persons that are on this Zoom call who wish to speak in support of this petition for the variance for the seawall extensions. Hearing no one speak up, I will ask Meg Collins, our secretary, has anyone submitted any letters in favor?
Yes, I have one letter.
Yeah, hold on.
The letter is from Kendra Bartlett.
No, wait, is that, for which property is that?
Oh, we're on up, aren't we? That's for me. I do not have any letters in support for this property.
Okay, so we have no letters in support. Thank you. Moving on, I will ask if there's anybody on this Zoom call who would like to speak in opposition to this petition.
Yes, I would, sir, Mr. Chairman. Patricia Sharkey.
Okay.
May I be recognized, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Now, wait, let me clarify one point, Ms. Sharkey. You submitted a written document to the BZA, a letter in opposition?
Yes, I did.
So you are intending to speak, and if you speak, you can either speak or you can read your letter, but we're not going to do both.
What I'd like to do is paraphrase my letter. I wanted,
that's fine. That's fine. Your letter won't be read, and that's the point. I would appreciate if you would paraphrase it, if you could.
But excuse me, sir. Before making that decision, I guess I'd like to know whether the objection that we filed was indeed provided to every one of the board members.
Every board member has received it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. I appreciate the time of the Board of Zoning Appeals. This is a matter in which I'm representing Tom King, who, as you know, has appealed these very same permits, both Mr. Upp's permit and Mr. McGee's permit. What we have is a situation in which we have Mr. King filed appeals of these permits within due time, timely filing. Yet what happened is that these parties rushed forward and built the seawalls. And then, of course, the town building commissioner issued a finding of imminent peril, which allowed him to go forward and build it. But we have now an after the fact variance in front of this BZA. Let's all understand the walls have been built. They're all there for everybody to see, and I think you're going to hear some other testimony about what they look like and whether in fact they are replacement seawalls. So I give you this background just to say Mr. King had filed appeals of these. He has a significant interest in this matter. As you know, at the last meeting, Mr. Chairman and others recused themselves from hearing Mr. King's appeals, and as a result, those appeals are going forward in front of a special BZA, which has not yet been actually seated, and with the delay has gone on now for Mr. King all the way from February when he first filed these through the present, where we have not been able to get a hearing on those appeals. It's totally improper, in our opinion, for these variances to go forward separately from those appeals. And as I go through this, I think you will see the extent to which these variances are intertwined with the permit itself. So to begin with this, what one needs to understand, with your indulgence, I'm going to be addressing both permits just so I don't have to repeat the same thing, because the same issues, the same facts, same drawings, same contractors, the same attorney representing them all the way through here. And as has been said by Mr. Trainer, this wall is a continuous wall. So with your indulgence, I would be addressing both of these so as not to be repetitive.
Yes, that's fine. I'm muted, so it doesn't make any difference.
Okay, so to begin with, I would point out that, again, these permits were approved in a single motion by the Building Commission, and they were approved. I would respectfully disagree with the chairman in the notion that this variance doesn't involve the entire seawall. I think it's improper to be piecemealing this seawall in order to talk about different requirements applying to different parts of the seawall. It's a single seawall. And the single seawall has returns on it. It's an entirely new seawall. It was approved as a seawall with a new section with return walls. So it's not two or separate seawalls. The thing I would like to point out is that as an initial matter, these variances cannot be issued because they simply don't meet the requirements of Section 154, 153. And those are as we've talked about with some of the other variance petitions in front of you today, those involve the question of whether or not the approval will be injurious to public health, safety, morals, and general welfare of the community. And I think as you heard in some of the previous conversation, those morals of the community are incorporated in town ordinances, and compliance with town ordinances is evidence of whether or not it's going to be injurious, because those ordinances indeed were adopted to protect the town, and particularly in this instance, protect the beach, the public beach, and the adjacent properties. The second prong of a variance determination is whether the use and value of the area adjacent to the property will be affected in substantially adverse manner. We would tell you and contend that there's no question, but this seawall is going to be further eroding the beach in front of the seawall as well as the side of the seawall. And these returns are vertical returns. They are 90-degree angles. This is a vertical steel pile seawall. It is of the absolutely worst type for eroding. It's well established, and I know many of you have been involved since the days in which the 2016 comprehensive plan was adopted, in which the town expressed its concern overwhelmingly for the preservation of the beach, which led to the adoption of the Shore Preservation Ordinance zoning district regulations, which I have cited ad nauseum and in detail in the documents before you. Those ordinances encompass the community's standards for construction on the beach. So first, we have adjacent properties being eroded by the worst seawalls that could be defined. Then we have the fact that this ordinance has not been complied with in one iota. Now, we have actually obtained a copy of the file from the clerk asking for every document in the file for these permit applications. There is nothing in there from the Corps of Engineers unless it was not provided by the clerk. Again, we had asked for the BZA to request the full record from the building commission. And in the appeals process, we will get that. In the permit appeal process, I assume we will get that. But the situation is that despite Mr. Trainer's remark, I have to tell you, nothing provided to us indicated the Army Corps of Engineers has taken any position on this. We do have the letter from the IDEM, from the IDNR. And I will tell you that in my reading of it, I don't see anything in there saying that they found it to be above the ordinary high water mark. Indeed, the department has no jurisdiction above the ordinary high water mark, and so it would be very odd if they were issuing a approval letter, which this is an emergency approval letter. In fact, the DNR the permits that Mr. Upp and Mr. Maggie have in front of the DNR have not been acted on yet. In fact, Long Beach Community Alliance has petitioned for each of those, for a public hearing on each of those, and they're still pending. So the emergency action taken here was not an approval by the DNR of construction below the ordinary high water mark, and it can't be approval of construction above the ordinary high water mark because they don't have any jurisdiction there. So I would just point out that there's a serious problem there. But apart from the DNR issue and apart from the Corps of Engineers approval, what needs to be understood is this Board of Zoning Appeals has particular concern, and the town has particular concern over the town ordinances that again were adopted after the comprehensive plan was adopted. And finding compliance with that is essential before you can go forward, that these have complied. I think that what we have, and Dr. LeMay may speak to this, but I think we have a building commission that has concluded that everything falls within the exception where we had a pre-existing seawall, and nothing needs to be complied with anymore. We have an issue of the entire beach ordinance being subsumed by that exception, and I would suggest to you that that is not legal. It's not what that ordinance that exception actually says, and furthermore, what we have here is not a pre-existing reconstruction of a pre-existing seawall. This seawall is far bigger. It is it contains these additional feet, as has been talked about. It's a different seawall. It doesn't have the cement on it. It is a entirely different seawall. And to suggest that somehow only the return walls need a variance is ludicrous. With this entirely different seawall, we now need to find compliance with every aspect of the beach ordinance. And there are substantial provisions in there that were designed to ensure that these neighboring properties would not be adversely affected, exactly the standard in your variance statute, variance ordinance and the statute. Therefore, you have a situation where compliance with those ordinances would have you potentially not approving. The Board of Building Commission should not have approved the worst possible construction design and construction materials in violation of the ordinance for these seawalls. I would point out that the drawings associated with these seawalls, by the way, go back to November of 2019. Yet they weren't brought in front of the Building Commission in a rush and emergency until January. Moreover, these parties, folks who own property down on that beach, know very well, have known for a long time that waters are rising, and yet they wait to come in front of this in front of the building commission, claim an emergency, clamor for immediate action, don't comply with anything in the ordinance. In the letter that I've provided you, I've listed some of these things that are extremely important in that ordinance. And I'm not going to go through them all, but among them is that is particularly that you have to have materials, you have to have slope, you have to have essentially minimized, you have to design and construct it to minimize the impact on the neighboring properties. And what are the neighboring properties, by the way, here? The town stops, 2 town stops are going to be eroded. These are priceless. The public beach in front of this is being further eroded. There is no question this is the worst construction design possible. Why didn't this building commission demand that they go back to the drawing board and come up with a design that was not going to be the worst possible for these permits, this seawall and the returns? Why are we allowing an exception? Why should we allow an exception for a completely non-conforming, worst possible design of a seawall right on the town stops, right on the public beach, and right on the property boundary? You just heard, there was a little bit of obfuscation there, I think, from Mr. Trainer, but it's right on the property boundary. So, we're allowing them to essentially run totally roughshod over all of the ordinances that were adopted by this town in response to a comprehensive plan to ensure that we're not going to have erosion of the beach, and right on our town stops where we already have erosion issues. This variance should not be issued. It's not in compliance with the standards for a variance. It is not in compliance with there has not been compliance with a single aspect of the beach ordinance. And we are looking at a situation where the variance is like the tail wagging the dog going in front of the appeals filed by Mr. King. If anything, these appeals, this variance should be taken up with Mr. King's appeals. And I would submit to you, if those of you who think you don't have, that you somehow have a conflict, and I don't know where your conflict lies.
Ms. Sharkey, could I ask you to please draw your comments to a close? You've made your comment repeatedly. You also submitted to us a detailed letter, which I've told you we all have, so I would appreciate if you would get to your final point and move on.
Thank you. I would submit to all of you that if you have had a conflict in hearing Mr. King's appeals, Mr. King strongly objects to the issuance of these variances. These variances are intimately intertwined with the permits that are going to be in front of a special BZA. This matter should be referred to that same special BZA. The variances should be taken up at the same time as the appeals of the permits. And dividing this is the problem you have is they didn't comply with anything. And I would say to you, Mr. Trainer was asked that question by the chairman at the preliminary hearing. And he said, well, since the building commission issued them, they must have complied. Well, in fact, that's absolutely not true. And that's why there was an appeal. And if they had properly waited for the 30 days.
Ms. Sharkey, we're not here to discuss or have you litigate Mr. Tom King's administrative decision appeals. So please either conclude or I will take the floor from you. Okay. All right, fine. What we've suggested to you are a couple alternatives. To send this over to the special BZA to be heard at the same time as Mr. King's appeals, so that it all goes forward at once and consistently. Or if you've got questions of fact about compliance, that's where that should come up. I think the conflicts of interest that have already been expressed here prohibit this BZA from ruling on this anyway. And I would say to you, lastly, that if you're not going to consolidate it, or if you're not going to deny these right out because they don't comply, then I would say that you really need to allow Mr. King to intervene and to fully brief and take evidence on this variance proposal. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anyone else on the call who would like to speak in opposition? No one else? Okay. Meg, our secretary, do we have any letters in opposition?
We have one letter in opposition for the Up and McGee properties. So that is 2116 and 2120 Lakeshore Drive. This is a letter submitted by Carly Thompson of 2200 Chasleton Drive. The letter is an email, but it's also filled out on the BZA 9 form. So instead of reading the entire form, I'm going to just read what Ms. Carlson has submitted. Okay, I want to correct that. So Ms. Carlson has submitted this on behalf of Cheryl Caberna of 2200 Chasleton Drive. The legal description is objections to setback variances for the Up residence at 2116 Lakeshore Drive and McGee residence at 2120 Lakeshore Drive. As a longtime owner in Long Beach and patron of Stop 22, the morale has already been severely damaged due to the development of the lots now known as 2116 and 2120 Lakeshore Drive. The previously extended seawalls should not have been allowed to be constructed, nor should additional setback allowances be made due to past building mistakes and permitting negligence. We also have seen safety issues arise when persons have attempted to walk along the beach in the last few years. Due to the extended seawalls and rising water levels, these extended seawalls have created a dangerous situation for those using the beach. Under the section that for adverse manner, that it will or will not be affected. She's stating it will be affected, and here's what she wrote. The lake's water levels will rise and lower at no fault of the landowners. However, the damage to the lakefront by demolishing the grass and dunes to install the extended seawalls has had a negative impact on the environment and surrounding neighbors' properties. While this was done a few years ago, we should prevent further damage to the waterfront, which recent building permits are continuing to allow. As a nearby homeowner, the damage done by the developers along the lakefront has been irreparable to the value of neighboring homes, including my own. Please stop allowing extended seawalls along the lakefront. And that concludes the letter.
Thank you, Meg. No other letters?
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, at this point, I will turn back to the petitioner and give the petitioner an opportunity to rebut the comments that were made in opposition. Mr. Trainer, do you care to speak?
Yes, I think that the objections entirely missed the point here and what occurred. The building commission granted an emergency permit. It was within its power to do so under the circumstances. It's ludicrous to argue that the petitioners had to get a variance first under these circumstances. You have the certificate of imminent peril that was issued by the building commissioner that's part of the record that I've circulated to all the members that describes what will happen if the construction had to stop. I mean, it's clear. Look at the photos that I've attached as well. You see what the condition was at the time before construction started. The approval, the DNR approval is part of the record that I submitted here, and you have it. It's number 3 in my submission. I ask that you look at it. If you reference it, it indicates with respect to 2116 Lakeshore Drive that the existing failing seawall is located at the natural ordinary high water mark. The existing failed seawall will be removed from the shoreline. It says the same thing with respect to 2120. The DNR permit is part of the record that I've attached. The Army Corps of Engineers permit is as well. They also found that the construction of the retaining wall was necessary to preserve the integrity, the return wall, I'm sorry, was necessary to preserve the integrity of the whole wall. That's plain. Currently, interestingly enough, we now have a state law that allows somebody to ask for an emergency permit. And the town of Long Beach has just enacted an ordinance that allows an emergency permit. We have here an existing legal protective structure that was in existence, that was damaged by a storm. An emergency permit was sought and granted. All procedures were followed. The DNR and Army Corps of Engineers approved the work. There's been no evidence that this adduced at this hearing that any erosion has been caused by this particular seawall. So based on the materials that you have in front of you, the photos, the surveys, everything else, I'd ask that you allow the variance with respect to the return wall and allow the placement of the return wall as is, which along the property line and more than 3 feet from the foundation.
Thank you, Mr. Trainer. For the record, let me just state I was just handed one more email, which I have not had an opportunity other than the skim right here. I don't know if anybody had an opportunity to see this one. It is from Carla Fargo, 2201 Chastleton Drive. I am not going to read it word for word. It reiterates many of the points that have been made. She basically talks about these structures are not designed to minimize erosion on the beach. She questions the property issue and whether the seawall or extension or whatever it is here is on property owned by the petitioners. And she, again, is addressing the entire seawall, not just the extension. So we'll take this for the record and take note of that. Meg, if you would take that. Thank you. Okay, at this point, I will declare the public comment portion of the meeting closed. Is there any comment that the Building Commission representative, Mr. LeMay, would like to make for our consideration before we discuss it? I see you shaking your head. I think you're saying no, correct? Okay. All right, at this point, then I will turn to the members of Board of Zoning Appeals. Again, at the end of our deliberation, we will have the opportunity to.
All right, turn to the
somebody.
Appeals again at the end of our. Somebody. Please.
At the end of our deliberation, we'll have the opportunity to make a motion to either approve the two variances or to
make a motion to either approve the various.
Well, we're getting our technical difficulties straightened out again. Got it. Thank you. After our deliberation, we'll have the opportunity to make a motion either to approve the two variances, deny the two variances, or to, based on what we have heard, and to continue this public hearing till the next meeting. So with that, I'll turn to the members of the Board of Zoning Appeals for discussion about this petition. I'll open the floor to whoever would like to address.
Mr. Trainer, you mentioned that there were documents that were given in our packet from the DNR and from the Army Corps of Engineers. I don't have any of that documentation.
I submitted this July 7th to Meg Collins, and she indicated that it was going to be circulated to all the BZA members. Should be an affidavit of Carl Tungate, an Army Corps of Engineers permit, an DNR permit, the Long Beach Building Commission certification of imminent peril. The drawings is approved by the Long Beach Building Commission, a blow up of the survey, and photos.
Yeah, we did.
Okay. It must have come through an email. Things came at the very end, so maybe it's
We did receive that.
Okay.
She did not.
Nope. No.
Clarification, were these materials in the record?
Please. No interruptions. At this point, maybe it's appropriate to mention, Mr. Trainer, these documents that you submitted, which we did receive, were received by us after the deadline for submitting documents. Nonetheless, we submitted those documents to the BZA members for their consideration. So Meg, you didn't get a chance to look at that. So will you take that into consideration as you are deciding what you would like to do today?
Another question. Mr. Trainer, in your opinion, where is the ordinary high water mark?
I would rely on the, what's disclosed in the survey by Mr. Thate, as well as the approved engineer drawings approved by the building commission. I would rely on what's disclosed there. I don't have a number in my mind. I'm just looking at the drawings that indicate where the high water mark is. The DNR indicates that they have reviewed the drawings, and they indicate that the location is landward of the existing failing seawall, which is located at the natural ordinary high water mark. That's what it says in the DNR permit. I should note too that one of the reasons that I submitted these when I did is that I had to get the permits from a third party. I did not find the permits in the building permit file. I got the permits from the engineer that's, solicited the permits for the project.
Thank you. Wait, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Just if I can help you or not. Have you seen, so you know where it's marked as the ordinary high water mark?
Yes.
Okay, you were just trying to draw that out of him, which he really didn't answer. Okay, go ahead. You're good, okay. Any other comments that anybody wants to make for our consideration or thoughts that they have after hearing the testimony? Rich?
Mr. Chairman. Current legal proceeding.
Okay, is everybody hearing what he's saying?
No, can't hear a thing he's saying.
Recuse myself from both McGee and Upside legal proceeding. Hearing what he's saying?
I didn't hear that.
No, I'm recusing myself from both the McGee and the Upside variances. I'm part of some legal proceedings that are cause a conflict for my participation.
Mr. Willoughby, that recusal, I obviously will accept his recusal at this point. That'll leave the four of us to decide this matter today.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Any, Ms. Morgan, Doug, Wickstrom, anybody have any other thoughts on what we've heard today and what you've reviewed?
I have a question just for clarification. Could you review again the extent of the variance that's under consideration right now? I mean, this is the sidewall seat, the return on the seawall structure, and the positioning relative to the property line and the setback line. Is that correct?
I think that's correct. What the petitioner is asking for is a variance for that side seawall extension beyond the
don't know how you describe what was there. It's the repair wall that was there, did not extend all the way to the old WPA wall. Okay, so this is that gap, which was approved by the building commission for them to put in that gap to extend the originally repaired seawall to the WPA wall. And the variance they're asking for, two variances, deal with the fact that 154.203 requires that any side seawall be no more than 3 feet into the setback. This seawall is in essence 6 feet into the setback as it goes to the property line.
Mhm.
And 154.057, I guess what you're asking for there is that requires a 6-foot setback. And so he's asking for a variance also because there is no setback there for the side seawall at this point. Okay?
Yes, and it's possible to evaluate this and simultaneously not value highly the process and procedure that led to these seawalls overall. I mean, this is really a relatively narrow variance that's being requested. Is that fair?
That's your description?
Yes.
I mean, I don't know what anybody else here, and I would agree with you, despite what has been said by some. This is a narrow variance that's being asked for. What has been put before us is the extension of the existing seawall back to the WPA wall. It is not the issuance of the building permit by the building commission. There was a lot of discussion, and that's what public comment is for. Say things in opposition and favor, but that is not before the BZA. All that's before us is an extension.
And is it, again, in the interest of understanding this was done in a time period when the exploration of alternatives, some of which almost certainly would have been superior, would have been difficult to do. Is that a fair characterization of what's going on here?
I don't know what it is that you're referring to.
I mean, some of the discussion that we've heard is there might have been a better way to do this.
And the shore protection ordinance requires that a petitioner demonstrate that this is the least erosive and so forth way to do things. And that is not what's before us.
Right.
That was what was before the building commission.
Okay.
We're not being asked, someone else can interject here, we're not being asked to review what the building commission did with respect to those seawalls.
Okay.
You as an individual can like it or dislike it. That's not what we're here for. We're here for the side setback extension to the WPA wall.
All right, that's what I understood. And okay, thank you.
And to your point about the timeliness and it had to be done, and I think Mr. Trainer referred to that, the emergency situation, which we're not here to assess whether there was emergency. That assessment was made by the building commission. That can be challenged by someone else. In fact, it is being challenged by someone else. And this is the point I was trying to make when I let individuals speak. We're not here to review their decision to grant the building, I'm pointing at the building commission representative. We're not here to review the building commission's decision. They made their decision. They made another decision, okay, that dealt with these side seawall extensions. That's what we're here to review, side seawall extensions.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mr. Gorman, can I expand a little bit?
Yes,
so that
please.
the legal question before us, and I've heard tonight, and perhaps because of all the detail, the reason they're here is this is a new seawall, not a repair or replacement of the existing, and which is not before us. These are new seawalls. And in order to build and have a legally existing seawall, they needed a variance from the shoreline protection ordinance. So that's what's important here. These extensions are new seawalls, okay? And then the legal threshold too that you must consider, and I believe that it's been presented, but that's up for you as the decision makers to decide, is that the contemplated extensions were required and necessary to reasonably preserve the shoreline and protect the property and others around. Those are the considerations. So that's, I guess, another legal threshold that you consider whether that determination has been made through the presentation that Mr. Trainer has made and the attending documents and related documents that have been submitted. And I would point you to, one indicator may or may not be the Army Corps of Engineers correspondence, DNR correspondence, those from the engineers. And again, those aren't for us to determine. They need to prove to you, and your decision is whether they've properly shown that.
I have one more thing I want to say. When you look at the definition of the ordinary high water mark, it's where the seawall is if there is no land or brush or grass. Is that correct? So how would the Army Corps of Engineers or the DNR have any authority to decide whether that was good or not, because that's above their jurisdiction? Am I interpreting that correctly?
No.
Restate what you've said, please, Ms.
According to Indiana's ordinary high water mark, the ruling, it says that if there is no brush or grass or sand, the ordinary high water mark is the seawall. So if that is indeed true, then how does the the DNR have a say above that, because that's out of their jurisdiction? If I'm interpreting that correctly, if not, correct me.
You're interpreting it incorrectly. Okay. Yes, I will clarify for you the way I understand. We're here looking at that new seawall extension, which goes from the end of the old seawall to our WPA wall. Building Commission made a determination that there was an emergency and they issued a permit. They then had another meeting which they approved the engineered drawings for that seawall, this extension. For the extension of the seawall, we're not talking about the seawall in general. And they also stated to the petitioner that he was able to proceed with the construction of this new seawall extension because in the Building Commission's interpretation, there was an emergency and it was necessary to put that extension in there. They then qualified their decision and said that because of these two ordinance sections, you need a variance. And as had been pointed out, this is sort of an ex post facto variance because this has already been constructed. And we addressed this during the preliminary hearing. We asked the Building Commission representative, Dr. LeMay, to comment on that, and he explained the emergency nature of why this was done, and they let them put in this wall with the understanding that if a variance was not received, this seawall extension would be removed. Okay, so I understand that. Is that comport with everyone's understanding of why this is before us? Now I'm going to get to your point, and that deals with where's the natural ordinary high water mark, and I don't necessarily know that's. I don't know that some of what I'm going to say is before us here, okay? Because in my view, we're only dealing with this extension. We have drawings which indicate where the natural ordinary high water mark is, okay? Those drawings were received by the Building Commission. Building Commission determined that these seawall extensions for the two separate properties were on property owned by the petitioner, and that's the threshold question. We can't grant the variance on property that's not in the town of Long Beach. So, but the Building Commission made this determination that it's within the town of Long Beach. I go back to what's controlling all of this. And that's the Gunderson decision. I maybe don't really know that we've been asked to talk about that, but that's the way you have to review a lot of these decisions. And the Gunderson decision was on February 14, 2018. And on page 3 of the Gunderson decision, the court in pretty clear language says, we hold the boundaries separating public trust land from privately owned riparian land along the shores of Lake Michigan is the common law ordinary high water mark. The state retains exclusive title up to that boundary. Okay, so that's, now you're saying, where is this ordinary high water mark? Okay. It's the common law definition of ordinary high water mark, which has been around for decades, centuries. It was put into writing by the Department of Natural Resources, Indiana Department of Natural Resources, on September 15, 2019. What is that? 7 months after Gunderson decision. It took the IDNR 7 months to acknowledge the Gunderson decision. And they said the ordinary high water mark, first of all, they said they take out of their ruling, they take out of their rules the old 581.5 measure, okay, which was never supported by court cases in the common law. But Indiana Department of Natural Resources used 581.5. On September 15, 2019, they said that's no longer valid, and that's exactly what the Supreme Court said. The Supreme Court is the law of the land in Indiana. The IDNR on September 15th said ordinary high water mark means the line on the shore of a waterway established by the fluctuations of water and indicated by physical characteristics. Examples of these physical characteristics include the following: a clear and natural line impressed on the bank, shelving, changes in the character of the soil, destruction of terrestrial vegetation, and the presence of litter or debris. Okay? That's the common law definition too, but the IDNR adopted that. Did you hear him say this toe of the seawall in there anywhere?
No.
No. Okay. So that's the term.
It said that on mine, that's why I answered.
It's not here.
Right.
Okay? It's not in the Supreme Court decision either. Okay? Mr. Trainer was quite correct. The state of Indiana chose to codify the Gunderson decision. They didn't need to do that because Indiana, the Gunderson decision is the law of Indiana. The state of Indiana adopted House Enrollment Act 1385 with an effective date of July 1, 2020. And that codified the holdings in Gunderson. Chapter 2.1 deals with the ownership of Lake Michigan in the public trust. The statute, so this is Indiana statutory law at this point, which is window dressing now on top of a state Supreme Court ruling and an IDNR rule. They define ordinary high water mark as the common law, and they go through terrestrial vegetation, the scrub line, I think people refer to it as often, okay? And they go on in section 3 of chapter 2.1, and this is the state of Indiana. This is the law of our state. The state of Indiana owns all of Lake Michigan within the boundaries of Indiana and trusts for the use and enjoyment of all citizens of Indiana. An owner of land that borders Lake Michigan does not have the exclusive right to use the water or land below the ordinary high water mark of Lake Michigan. Once again, didn't answer your question yet. Where is that? Okay, it's the common law scrub line. And you have, if you're lakeward of that, that's public land. It's not private land. Building Commission determined that these seawall extensions were on land owned by the homeowner. Okay, not talking about the seawall, just talking about that. So then we go to the drawings. Mr. Trainer referred to these drawings a number of times. These drawings, of course, we had to get from the Building Commission. Okay, this is the Building Commission's file. This was what provided to all of us. We were given a set of drawings that was submitted to the Building Commission on January 16, 2020 for their meeting. They're the ones that were marked preliminary up in the top right-hand corner. That's handwriting that I think one of the building commissioners wrote up there. It has no indication of where the ordinary high water mark is. This is January, okay? We have a second set of drawings, which was submitted to the Building Commission on February 14, 2020, okay, for their Building Commission meeting. They had 2 meetings where they considered this. They approved finally the wall based on these drawings, okay? These drawings from February 14, 2020, these drawings are actually dated February 14th. Well, they're actually dated the same day, ironically. How about that? Indicates where the natural ordinary high water mark is. You ever familiar with this? Okay. The natural ordinary high water mark starts down along stop. These are the 2 properties together. So this would be the McGee property, 2120. The natural ordinary high water mark starts down, actually, according to this, landward of the WPA wall. Okay. It then runs up to this seawall extension in the seawall, and then it follows the seawall up, and it follows the seawall across, it follows the seawall down to the other side of 2116. So you look at this, and I just read you guys the common law definition, and I read you what the IDNR said where the natural ordinary high water mark is, and I read you what the state of Indiana says. And I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, water's way back over here and the water's over here, but yet I have drawings that I don't know they were obviously accepted and acted upon by the Building Commission. They were by an engineer here, and it shows the natural ordinary high water mark paralleling a seawall. Seems kind of odd to me, okay? But why did this engineer do this, right? The engineer's got to have a basis for what he did. We were also given out of the Building Commission file a January 23, 2020 email from Ryan Muller. He's with the IDNR. He's the Director of Division of Water. And he says the same thing with respect to both 2116 and 2120. He says both the new seawall and toe stone will be located or installed along and or landward of the existing failed seawall, which is located at the natural ordinary high water mark. Where do you get this? Okay, this is guy from IDNR says, yes, the natural ordinary high water mark is, I think the vernacular is the toe of the seawall. Well, where did he get that? He got that from a website. Okay? September 15th is when the IDNR issued their rule. And I have to say, I don't have a date on this. This is subsequent to September 15th by, I don't know how many days or weeks. This is by the Indiana Department of Natural Resources. It's a web page comment, okay? It is not a rule. It is not a regulation. It is not a law. The IDNR can't make laws. They can only make regulations and rules for how to interpret the law. So I don't know what this is, quite frankly, other than a website posting by the IDNR. And what this says is they say we adopt the common law, which is what they said on September 15th of 2019. And then it goes on and says the Indiana DNR will apply the common law ordinary high water mark when considering applications for the construction activities along Lake Michigan shoreline. Common law, Ryan Muller said it's not, it's something out in the water. This ordinary high water mark, if it's tracking that seawall is out in the water. It's not where the shore, it's not where the scrub line is. But this thing from the IDNR goes on to say the DNR will verify the location of the ordinary high water mark on a case-by-case basis. And that's good because the shoreline varies from property to property. And then they go on and they say at locations where an existing seawall is present, which is this case here, 2116 and 2120, in locations where an existing seawall is present and located lakeward of the natural ordinary high water mark, the DNR will consider the toe of the seawall as the natural ordinary high water mark for jurisdictional purposes. So where there's a seawall lakeward of the ordinary high water mark, which looks, I mean, I'm not an expert and I'm not saying what is a fact, but you have these two seawalls which appear to be lakeward of what I think a commoner might say is the natural ordinary high water mark, then the DNR says, hold on a minute. When we got a seawall out there, we got an artificial structure out there, it's going to create a new natural ordinary high water mark. Okay? And they will consider this. So this is not a law, this is not a regulation, this is not a rule, it is them considering this. So where does Ryan Muller get this from? He gets this from a web page on the IDNR website. So what is, I'm getting, I hope I'm taking me a long time, but it took me a long time to try to figure out what I thought was going on here. So what does all this do for me? But it brings me back to where I started. It brings me back to the Gunderson decision, which is the law of the land, right? So with that, I'll direct you to page 26 of the Gunderson decision. And the first sentence on the top of page 26 says, if administrative rules and regulations, and that's not even a rule or a regulation, but if administrative rules and regulations are in conflict with the state's organic law or antagonistic to the general rule of the state, then they are invalid. Well, it's pretty clear that this consideration of the toe of the seawall as the natural ordinary high water mark is inconsistent to both the Supreme Court decision and the state law in Indiana. The second sentence on page 26 goes on to say, we recognize that the administrative natural ordinary high water mark serves other valid purposes, namely as a jurisdictional benchmark for administrating regulatory programs by the DNR and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. So it serves other purposes. In other words, other than determining who owns the property, okay, for jurisdictional purposes. Somewhere. At locations where an existing seawall is present and located lakeward of the ordinary high water mark, the DNR will consider the toe of the seawall as the ordinary high water mark for jurisdictional purposes. So this is faulty in my opinion for two reasons. One, it's using an artificial structure to create a natural ordinary high water mark. And even if you want to say, I'm not an expert here, I'm not on the IDNR, I'm just chairman of the BZA here. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, okay? So I'll admit I can certainly read things wrong. But they go on to say this is for jurisdictional purposes. So what I'm pointing out to you is there's a lot of uncertainty here. So where did all lead me? I guess it led me back to the building commission. We're here to, in essence, approve or deny this seawall extension after a decision was made by the building commission, okay? If the building commission is using this webpage here to say, yes, the natural ordinary high water mark is out here, me personally, I would think the building commission needs to reassess what they're doing. But then it goes to, you got these drawings. The drawings are not made up, they're not artificial. The drawings reflect all these things I've just read to you. So this Edgewater Resources, who drew this natural ordinary high water mark, which is not a realistic natural ordinary high water mark. It's real. This is done by a professional relying on these documents. So the building commission, in my opinion, took a decision. We've got their materials, we've got their minutes. I feel that I'm in a position to approve these variances for the seawall extensions based on what the building commission did. Now, I've sat here and I've told you, and this is all editorial comment. This is not part of any ruling here. Maybe the building commission needs to re-look at this. And I don't know, I'm not an expert here, but I'm raising these points to be considered. But they took a decision. At this point, I'm willing to accept their decision. Also, I'll accept their decision on the condition that if this body were to grant the variances for these seawall extensions, if some subsequent event, such as Mr. Tom King's administrative appeals, we've heard those referred to, and I asked one of the speakers to not litigate the Tom King appeals before us because they're not before us. But they are out there, they will get decided, and the Tom King administrative appeals basically deal with what the 20 minutes that I've just expounded upon. They deal with this thing out here. That's not what we're dealing on. So there could be a decision by somebody, by the BZA, by the special BZA, by the town of Long Beach, by the IDNR, by some state agency. There could be some kind of decision which says, hey, wait a second. We got this natural ordinary high water mark. We weren't wrong. Those walls should not have received a permit. And I'm not saying that's the answer or anything. And I'm not saying what would be the relief or any. I'm not getting into any of that. But I think I'm in a position, based on all of what I've been able to understand, is I'm willing to go along with what the building commission said for those two extensions, on the condition that if there is a subsequent decision along the lines of what I said, our variance is drawn into question, because our variance can't stand if the walls don't stand. And one of the speakers made that point, okay? And I do agree with that point, but we're not here to decide whether those walls stand. We're here to decide whether this stands. I think they should stand. But if something happens out there, then our variance needs to be conditioned on that. It needs to fall away or be somehow otherwise, affected. So did I answer your question about where is the natural ordinary high water mark? You don't want me to do this again, do you?
No. No, but thank you, Tim. That is helpful. I appreciate you going through that.
Okay, well, I did it for my benefit. I'm glad you asked the question because, I've struggled with this myself. When you look at these drawings and you read all these documents and you read the court case and you read the state law and, you're trying to get these things to line up. And then I look at what the building commission has done and I was not at the February meeting. So, I wasn't there to hear what they said. So that's where I am. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Willoughby.
Clarity here is, I think that you get to take the building commission's decision into account as part of the larger record.
Yes.
But the simplistic approach, and I think it makes it easier for you, is whether the ordinance, which requires an expert, right, the engineers, to delineate or dictate or to put in that document, right, where they've determined the natural ordinary high water mark has been. And so you get to decide and take that into account as whether you think that's sufficient and whether that's it. Under the ordinance, it's my interpretation for your benefit, but you're the decision makers, is have they complied with the ordinance, the shoreline protection ordinance, and whether the building commission got it wrong or not. I think the decision is easier, and I use that term not lightly. It's easier because it's more bright line. Did they comply with the requirements of the ordinance, and did they supply you with a document that delineates where that natural ordinary high water mark, and anything before you that's been presented tonight? Is there any evidence before you to counter that? Is there another delineation report? Is there anything else? So to me, it makes your decision one way or the other, however you fall, is to whether that they've complied with the requirements under that ordinance. And as Mr. Gorman has indicated, you do have a document that was submitted to the building commission upon which they relied, but you also get to rely on that in making your determination of whether they've complied with the steps and the requirements under the ordinance.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay, we can make a motion to approve, deny, or to continue this matter to the next meeting if there is a lot of uncertainty as to what's going on. I guess based on what I've told you right here is I'm willing to make a motion to approve these two variances based on findings and decisions that I have drafted. So I will read these with the motion being to approve the two variances. Let me give you a copy of this so you can read along with me. And if there's any comments or changes, please. Okay. This is for 2116 Lakeshore Drive. And although we've been talking about both properties and a lot of what we said applies to both properties, this public hearing is for 2116. Each property is unique and has a separate owner, so it requires a separate public hearing. So this is for 2116 Lakeshore Drive. The petitioners are requesting a development standard variance for the purpose of constructing a new seawall extension that will be both greater than 3 feet from the side foundation of the primary structure and extend into the side setback by more than 3 feet, which is generally impermissible under Section 154-203-3 and Section 154-057. And that is because the petitioner is maintaining that he is applying for a variance from both of those sections, and I understand that. Do you have a copy of this? Get his. I always wanted our secretary to have a copy of this.
You have the originals.
Okay, public hearing is held on July 14, 2020. The Long Beach Advisory Board of Zoning Appeals, after giving due consideration to the petitioner's petition for standard development variance, supporting documents, testimony, and evidence presented during the public hearing on the subject petition, other materials presented to the BZA that are part of the public record, and the legal requirements set forth under the Indiana and Long Beach codes, the BZA now makes the following findings. The approval of the requested development standard variance from the town's general restriction against allowing the construction and installation of seawall extension that will be both greater than 3 feet from the side foundation of the primary structure and extend into the side setback by more than 3 feet will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare, because the contemplated seawall extension is required and necessary to reasonably preserve the shoreline and protect the subject property as well as neighboring properties. The project will comply with and be construed in accordance with the applicable terms of all Long Beach town ordinances, and petitioner has secured or will secure all required federal, state, county, and local permits and approvals. The use and value of the area adjacent to the property subject to the requested developmental standard variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner because the project involves updating and improving the property while maintaining its general compatibility with the character of the immediate neighborhood, and is also required and necessary to reasonably preserve the shoreline and protect the subject property as well as neighboring properties. The strict application of the Long Beach zoning code will result in practical difficulties in the use of the subject property for which a developmental standard variance is sought, because the property is in peril due to its location along the shoreline of Lake Michigan, combined with recent conditions of the lake and erosion of the shoreline. If petitioners are not allowed to install the seawall extension, despite the determination being made that it is required and necessary to reasonably preserve the shoreline and protect the subject property, they are at risk of suffering significant damage and potentially a total loss of their property due to circumstances beyond their control. All relief granted by the BZA for the subject petition should be only under section 154-2033 and 154-057. As no other relief from any other section is properly before the BZA for consideration. So those are the findings. The decision is based on the foregoing findings as well as due regard for the requirements of both state and local laws. It is the decision of the BZA to approve and grant the requested standard development variance to allow petitioners to construct a side seawall extension that will be 6 feet from the side foundation of their primary structure and extend into their side setback by more than the 3 feet, which is generally impermissible under section 154-2033 of the town zoning code, subject to the following determinations and or conditions. The standard development variance is granted as relief only from sections 154-2033 and 154-057 of the zoning code, as petitioners previously withdrew their request. I will strike that because they have not withdrawn that request for the variance. Number two, no part of these findings and decisions shall be deemed to include any consideration or determination regarding any other sections of the zoning code, including as no relief under any other section was requested of or otherwise properly before the BZA for consideration as part of the subject petition. And on January 16, 2020, the Building Commission granted a building permit for the side seawall extension. Said permit was conditioned on petitioners obtaining a variance for such construction, with the understanding that if the variance was not obtained, the side seawall extension must be removed at petitioner's expense. On February 14, 2020, the Building Commission approved construction of the side seawall extension based on approved engineered drawings and related submissions by the petitioners, all of which are part of the BZA record. As of the date of this public hearing, construction of the side seawall extension has been completed. Number four, the BZA is mindful of and notes that any subsequent action or decision regarding the seawall located on the subject property by any governing body or entity, including but not limited to the Town of Long Beach Building Commission, Long Beach Special BZA, an Indiana court, or any Indiana governmental or administrative agency may also apply to the variance granted for the side seawall extension. Anybody have any amendments they want to this? If not, I'll ask for a second.
And Mr. Gorman, just as a point of clarity, and I think that there's a few places throughout, because as you notice, Mr. Trainer, I think, made clear that he did not intend, even though we may have understood that he withdrew those. So maybe you might want to consider an amendment that adds under each section, in the request section, relief under 057 and in section 104 so that and/or so that it's both.
I think I read those aloud, but you're so the amendment to the piece of paper in front of you is that wherever it's the variance is for 154.2033, it's also 154.057. Okay? So I make the motion. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Wicks. Any discussion? Thank you. Couldn't hide. I guess I don't have anything else. Nothing else? Okay. I will then turn to our secretary and ask Meg Collins to please call the roll. There are 4 members at this point that would require an affirmative vote by 3 of the 4 members that are present now on this matter, because it requires a majority of those in office, not those in the meeting. So if you would please call the roll, it requires 3 votes to approve this motion.
Barb Morgan.
Barb Morgan is approved. Doug Wickstrom.
I approve.
Meg Canier. Mike Gorman.
I approve. So this motion is adopted in a 3-to-1 vote. And Mrs. Trainer, the client is 2 variances for the seawall extension on the west side of his property. That ends our public hearing on 2020-2016. Now we'll run on to the public hearing for 2021-2020.
Typically, when someone gets a variance, they need to go back to the building commission and ask for a permit. Given the fact that this return wall is already built, Chris, do they need to do that?
Well, I would believe that's a separate matter, but it seems to me, and I don't have those permits in front of me, that the decision was made that they're granted subject to them getting, so that they received their permits already to build. So probably need to clarify that, and they need to make sure that their paperwork is in order. But I believe that the previous decision was those were approved with subject to getting this variance.
Okay.
So what was the answer you received, Mr. LeMay?
That they do not, unless they find otherwise in their records that a permit wasn't issued.
You agree with that? I mean, you're raising a building commission question, actually, whether they need to come back to you. We did not direct them back to you.
I'm good with that. It seems like to make them come back for a permit retroactively would be a waste of time.
But let's be clear, the onus is on them. That they receive their variance, but the onus is on them to make sure they have the proper permits. Mm-hmm.
We gave them a permit pending them getting the variance, so I'm good with this.
Okay. We have the next public hearing. This is for Michael McGee, 2120 Lakeshore Drive. It's a developmental standard variance petition requesting two variances from the requirements of section 154-2033, permissible shoreline preservation structures and specifications concerning the installation of the side seawall, and section 154-057, schedule of district regulations concerning side setback. Petitioners are requesting to install a side seawall that extends into the side setback by more than 3 feet. Preliminary hearing opened at 16/2020 BZA meeting. Public hearing is set to open at today's regularly scheduled meeting. I will return to our secretary and ask whether the petitioner has met all the requirements to declare the public meeting open.
Yes, the petitioner has met all requirements.
Thank you. At this point, I will call the petitioner forward again. Mr. Trainer, I would suspect.
Yes.
To state your case regarding the McGee property for the side wall extension. I had this, before you proceed, I had this discussion with council prior. These are separate public hearings, but I do not intend, for sake of clarity or brevity, for both those two reasons, to recreate all the comments that they made, because those comments will equally applicable to both of these properties. So we had a discussion here where our comments really land on both properties. So I guess I will make, do I need to make a motion or just state that for the record, I will incorporate into the McGee public hearing the discussions from the public hearing as they relate to his property also.
Yeah, and I think a little bit further incorporate everything, the discussion along with any submissions that were made for up, so that the McGee record will reflect whatever discussions had in McGee, as well as the entirety of the up discussions and or submissions.
We all clear on that? Mr. Trainer, you all clear on that?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So why don't you go ahead and state your case for Mr. McGee?
All right, I would just indicate that the situation is different to the extent that the extension of the seawall is on the east side of the properties in question, and the length of the extension, according to survey, is 7 feet. But that is really the only substantive difference involved here. The background, all the proceedings beforehand that we talked about all apply equally to Mr. McGee. It's just a difference in length of that extension, and it's on that side of the house. Same reasons that I'd given before would stand for Mr. McGee.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Trainer. I'll move on. I'll call for any persons who are on this call who wish to speak in support of this position. I guess there'll be someone other than who spoke before, because what you said before will be incorporated into this petition also. So does anybody care to speak in favor? There is none, and we've already covered, I think you do have a separate letter for McGee in favor, don't you? Wait, before, can I please have that letter? I'm gonna make, this is a letter in favor of the variances. And I'm gonna short circuit the letter a little bit. This is from Kendra Bartlett, 2102 Oakenwall Drive, and she is in favor. I'm writing this letter in support of the petition filed by Michael McGee at 2120 Lakeshore Drive. It is my understanding that the work at this property is finished, and this variance will simply allow the paperwork and property details be reflective of the work done. In other words, as long as there's no further work changing what is now there, I am support of this variance. The next three paragraphs basically address the prior history on the property and concerns with the overall seawall structure, not just these extensions. So I'm going to accept this letter as a letter in favor of the McGee petition. So that's the only additional letter. So now we will move on to, I'll call for persons on the Zoom call. If anyone cares to speak in opposition to this variance petition.
I do.
Ms. Sharkey, I remember you've heard me say your comments are incorporated in here too. So if you have something new to say, please go ahead.
I do have additional comments here.
Okay, then that's fine.
Mr. Chairman, you gave a long discussion of natural ordinary high water mark, which I think was appropriate and is correct. But what you failed to realize with that is that it's jurisdictional. This BZA has no jurisdiction to grant a variance if they don't have evidence in front of them of compliance with the common law natural ordinary high water mark. Mr. McGee's petition contains nothing that shows you that. The marks that you may have on drawings prepared by a surveyor or even prepared by somebody named Edgewater Resources are not a delineation by a delineation consultant, as is required by the beach ordinance. So on the face of it, you do not have a compliant natural ordinary high water mark delineation in front of you. You cannot tell if you have jurisdiction. The fact that the BZA, the building commission acted, you've already said, I'm hearing conflicting things, but it appears you are considering it somehow as though they acted properly, when in fact it's on appeal. And in fact, as we've suggested, you have no evidence in front of you showing compliance with multiple aspects of the beach ordinance. So you don't have jurisdiction. You don't have any evidence that this complies with any aspect, because indeed they have not put anything in to this variance to show you that they comply, that this, even if you want to limit it to just the return, that even the return complies. Finally, I would point out to you, Mr. Chairman, that I believe in your written order there, and I hope all of you board members will consider this. There was no mention of the second prong. You need to be looking at your authority for a variance. You cannot issue a variance unless all three prongs are met. The prong regarding adverse effects on adjacent properties was not mentioned by Mr. Gorman, I believe, in the motion you just acted on. You cannot grant a variance without making a determination as to whether or not you are having an adverse impact on the surrounding properties. I have referenced for you all of the provisions of the zoning of the beach overlay ordinance that are designed to ensure minimization of erosive impact on neighboring properties, and you have no evidence, and in fact, none of them have been complied with. You have no evidence showing they've been complied with. Therefore, you have evidence in front of you that what the town had determined was necessary to protect adjacent properties has not been provided to you in this application. Therefore, you cannot approve this. You don't have the jurisdiction to approve it because you don't have a delineation consultant who has provided you with a delineation and that you are responsible for the town ordinances. You need to be looking at the provisions of the beach ordinance and the town ordinance. You need to be looking at the provisions of that are the three prongs required in order to issue a variance. And unless you're looking at those, you are not doing your job. It is not just a question of whether these properties had an emergency. Under the new law, as you well know, you still have to comply with the town ordinances, even if you have an emergency. You don't have a complete application until you've demonstrated compliance with the beach ordinance. And this is so critical for how this town is administering this beach ordinance. We know these walls have been built. It's critical to establish the standard. When what you're doing right now, without properly applying the standards for variance, and without looking at the beach ordinance in detail and requiring that they have supplied you with evidence of compliance, The building commission didn't require it. They were wrong. It's on appeal. That's why this should be taken up at the same time with that. But since you've decided in the other one not to do it, I take it you're not going to do it here either. It's a mistake. You don't have the record in front of you. And you can't, but you don't have the information necessary to make this, and you don't have jurisdiction. So you must deny this appeal. Excuse me, this variance. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else on this Zoom call care to speak in opposition? Okay, I hear no one. There are no additional letters, are there, or Meg? Specific just to the McGee property? Yeah, she read the one before that also applied to the McGee property. So, okay, at this point, I'll give the petitioner an opportunity if he cares to rebut the comments that were made in opposition. Rich Trainer, do you care to speak again?
Just briefly, again, with respect to 2120, it's not for the entire return, it's for the extension. And we've met the requirements of the ordinance.
Thank you. Okay, I will now declare the public comment portion of this public hearing closed. Bob LeMay, on behalf of the Building Commission, do you care to add anything for us at this point?
No.
Thank you. Okay, I will now turn this over to the BZA for discussion or comments or questions, under the understanding that the comments, discussions that we had for the up property equally apply to this property. So I'll turn to anybody here, Ms. Morgan, Mr. Wickstrom, or Ms. Canyor, or myself. Anybody care to add anything? Let me ask one question. I mean, I trust that we all understand that the findings and decisions we read for the first variance, which is separate now from this one, touched all three standards. We talked about no adverse effect on property. Whether someone else agrees with that or not is not what's at issue here. It's we as a body made that determination. We have the drawings here that the building commission, it's a question for Mr. LeMay, building commission. We have the drawings here for the properties, which shows the national high water mark, and I've explained it's not. I agree with that at this point. Is there a basis for it? Edgewater Resources is the organization that provides these documents for you, and this is what the building commission used to rely on. Are they considered a delineation expert under the shore protection?
Can they hear me if I talk? I've lost my Zoom connection.
I hear you.
I guess they're hearing me. Okay. The building commission has accepted delineations by certified coastal engineers.
And this party who provided these drawings is a certified coastal engineer.
They are certified by the state of Michigan.
Yeah, that was what I had understood from the building commission. So whether someone else thinks they're qualified or not, that isn't the issue we were deciding. Okay, it could very well be an issue that someone else takes up in a different proceeding. Okay, we tend to always mix in another proceeding with this seawall extension. I agree that the petition itself was light on evidence. That was the point of the preliminary hearing, and we received a number of drawings and letters and documentation that were relying on, in addition to the petition and in addition to the comments made at this meeting and as so. I have the same first property, so I will make to approve the two variances for the Michael McGee property 2120 with respect to the Seawall extension. Okay, and I have findings. The request is that the petitioner requests a variance for the purpose of constructing a new seawall extension that will be both greater than 3 feet from the side foundation of the primary structure and extend the side setback by more than 3 feet, which is generally impermissible under 154, 203, and 154, 054. Sorry that if I'm gonna read something I prepared, Meg. Similar to the prior findings and decisions, if I omit reference to both of the sections of the zoning code, whenever I refer to one, I'm referring to both of them for the variance. The date of the public hearing is July 14, 2020. Long Beach Advisory Board of Zoning Appeals, after giving due consideration to the petitioner's petition for standard development variance, supporting documents, testimony, and evidence presented during the public hearing on the subject petition, other materials presented to the BZA that are part of the public record, and the legal requirements set forth under the Indiana and Long Beach codes, the BZA now makes the following findings. Number one, the approval of the requested developmental standard variance from the town's general restrictions allowing the construction and installation of seawall extensions that will be both greater than 3 feet from the side foundation of a primary structure and extend into a side setback by more than 3 feet will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare because the contemplated seawall extension is required and necessary to reasonably preserve the shoreline and protect the subject property as well as neighboring property. The project will be in accordance, in compliance with all applicable of the Long Beach Town ordinances, and petitioner has secured or will secure all required federal, state, county, and local permits and approvals. Number two, the use and value of an area adjacent to the property subject to the requested development standard variance will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner because the project involves updating and improving the property while maintaining its general compatibility with the character of the immediate neighborhood and is also required and necessary to reasonably preserve the shoreline and protect the subject property as well as neighboring properties. The strict application of the Long Beach zoning code will result in practical difficulties in the use of the subject property for which a developmental standard variance is sought because the property is in peril due to its location along the shoreline of Lake Michigan, combined with recent conditions of the lake and erosion along the shoreline. If petitioner is not allowed to install the seawall extension despite the determination being made that it is required and necessary to reasonably preserve the shoreline and protect the subject property, he is at risk of suffering significant damage and potentially a total loss of their property due to circumstances beyond their control. All relief granted by the BZA for the subject petition should be only under sections 154.2033 and 154.057, as no other relief from any other section is properly before the BZA for consideration. Based on the foregoing findings, as in regard to the requirements of the laws, it is a decision of the BZA to approve and grant the requested standard development variance to allow petitioner to construct a seawall extension that will be 6 feet from the side foundation of their primary structure and extend into their side setback by more than 3 feet. which is generally permissible under section 154.2033 and 154.057 of the town zoning code, subject to the following determinations and/or conditions. Number one, the standard development variance is relief only from section 154.2033 and 154.057 of the zoning code as petitioner previously, and strike that last petitioner, go down and withdraw that request. Number two, no part of these findings and decisions shall be deemed to include any consideration or determination regarding any other section of the zoning code, including as no relief under any other section was requested of or otherwise properly before the BZA for consideration as part of the subject petition. And on January 16, 2020, the Building Commission granted a building permit for the side seawall extension. Said permit was conditioned on petitioners obtaining a variance for such construction, with the understanding that if a variance was not obtained, the side seawall extension must be removed at petitioner's expense. On February 14, 2020, the Building Commission approved construction of the side seawall extension based on approved engineered drawings and related submissions by petitioners, all of which are part of the BZA record. As of the date of this public hearing, construction of the side seawall extension has been completed. Number four, the BZA is mindful of and notes that any subsequent action or decision regarding the seawall located on the subject property by any governing body or entity, including but not limited to the Town of Long Beach, Long Beach Building Commission, Long Beach Special BZA, an Indiana court, or any Indiana governmental or administrative agency, may also apply to the variance granted for the side seawall extension. So with that, if no one has any changes that they would request to what I've read, I'll ask for a second to that motion. So we have a motion by Mr. Gorman, a second by Mr. Wickstrom. Is there any further discussion on this motion and the findings and decisions? Okay. Hearing none, I will ask our secretary to please call the roll.
Rich Jursich has recused himself. Barb Morgan. Barb Morgan approves. Doug Wickstrom. Meg Canier. Mike Gorman.
I approve. So that this motion passes on a 3-1 vote. So these variances are granted for the side seawall extension. So that concludes this public hearing. And we'll turn back to Mr. Cruz. Are you still with us?
Absolutely.
All right. Now
let me turn to the next our secretary. Did we get something?
Yes, the green cards have been submitted for the record.
And to the best of your ability under this time pressure, which is fair, you should have received these previously. They appear to be in order.
They do.
Okay.
And all other requirements have been met.
Okay. We shall proceed with your rules. Just give me a moment. As by this time, everything's falling off my table. Okay. So, this is our final public hearing. It is for Kevin and Jocelyn Cruz, 2027 Oriole Trail, Developmental Standard Variance Petition requesting variances from the requirements of 157, Schedule of District Regulations concerning setbacks, Section 154, non-conforming residential dwelling alteration permitted. I think I gave the recitation previously. The petitioner was first before us in October, has been before us numerous times. There have been numerous postponements. We are finally at the public hearing stage. So with that, I will declare the public hearing open, and I will call upon the petitioner to state his case for us. Mr. Cruz, go ahead.
We're looking to add the Four Seasons room on our house and also extend the deck out, which we've submitted plans. Last time we met in person, we had a list of things to get taken care of, which we did accomplish. We were able to get the plans revised. We did have Fate come out and do a survey of the property and then take care of, there were 3 other things that we did take care of that you gave us to do, and were all submitted.
Anything further? Are you completed? You finished?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. For the sake of the record here, so we are deliberating this correctly. I listed off 2 sections of the zoning code at the last meeting at which you were before us, which was, I believe, the February meeting. You withdrew your petition for the setback variance. So I just want to, for the record, I'm stating we're not considering the setback variance.
Well, it was when we last discussed, we had looked at the plans and the variance, the addition to the house was within code, as along with the deck addition. And we went and I believe we went back and forth because it's been a while, and I apologize, but we were able to get new plans drawn up, which was one of the things we were asked to do, and then and get the Fate to come out and do a survey, which was one of the things we also were asked to do. And then as far as withdrawing the variance, what was discussed was that I think Mr. LeMay may have mentioned that we would still need the variance based on the current ordinance.
Well, I will refresh your memory. Okay, at the February 14th meeting, you at the February 4th meeting, you did withdraw your variance. You told us what you just told us at the beginning here, that the property is within the setback requirements, and some of these papers you gave us previously said that. So we asked you in February, you're telling us there's no setback variance, why are you asking for a variance? Since our meeting was deferred and it had been a long time, we, as a consideration to you, gave you a list of things that you were to provide to us. And number 3 on that list, petitioner is withdrawing requests for setback variance.
Correct.
Reiterate that.
Yes.
So we have nothing in front of us that you've submitted to us for a setback variance. So we are proceeding at this point without a request for a setback variance.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, okay, thank you. So now I will call for any persons who wish on the Zoom call who wish to speak in favor of this request for a variance. Is there anybody that wish to speak in favor? Hearing none, Ms. Collins, do we have any letters for Mr. Cruz in favor? No, okay. Okay, I will now call for any members, any persons in the public who are on the Zoom call who wish to speak in opposition to this petition. Hear anybody? Hearing no one, I will ask Ms. Collins, has we received any letters in opposition?
We have not.
We have not. Okay, so with that, I will declare the public comment portion of the meeting closed. Anything from Mr. LeMay that they're to add on? Don't say anything at this point if you don't have anything to add. I just thought I would shine chance here, Bob.
Yeah, just, again, the building commission's position is they have a non-conforming property because their garage is in the setback. They want to increase the volume by adding a four-season room and a deck, which increases the footprint. I'm not sure if we ever got calculations in terms of lot coverage. I know we asked for those. And I think I heard Mr. Cruz say that we did get a site plan with elevations. So that's basically where the building commission was at.
Correct.
Thank you. No, we did not receive anything with respect to lot coverage from Mr. Cruz. But then again, he's not asking for the variance for lot coverage, so it really wasn't relevant to the BZA. It may be relevant to the building commission, that's for sure, but it is not relevant to the BZA.
With the new state survey, we're currently at 18.9%.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I will now turn to the BZA. And again, an approve, deny, or review. So first open it up to discussion among us. If you have any thoughts or comments? Mr. Jurczyk, you're joining us again. Thank you.
Yes, I am.
All right. Anybody?
I would miss this one. It's been a long time.
Anybody care to speak on what they think about what's going on with Mr. Cruz's property?
Well, I don't know what to do with the same one.
Same one.
Can we get Meg Collins to mute her microphone?
You have everything that we all. No.
Can we get Meg Collins to mute her microphone?
You said you were supposed to. Thank you.
I don't have a device.
Sorry, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was talking to Meg. Go ahead, Barbara. Oh, okay.
It just doesn't seem like I have enough information to know unlock coverage or setbacks.
Well, there is no setback variance being requested. There is no lot coverage variance request. There is only one variance request that Mr. Cruz is asking for, and that's because it's a non-conforming property. And as you heard Mr. LeMay explain, it's non-conforming. Bob, why is it non-conforming?
Because the existing garage is in the setback.
Okay, so it's non-conforming. So he needs a variance in order to do what he showed us in his plans. And we, as part of our 6 points that we attempted to capsulize what we've talked about since October, okay, we talked about the 2 things he needs in order to get his variance. And he's asking for a volume variance, and that's 12 feet by 20 feet by 1 story. It's 240 square feet. He's asking for a footprint variance. Those are the 2 problems with the ordinance he's looking for variance from. You can't increase volume, you can't increase footprint. He's increasing both. He's increasing volume by 240 square feet. He's increasing volume by 640 square feet.
But do we know what that means versus what he's already covered his lot with?
He's not asking for a lot coverage variance from us. That will be the building commission's, that'll be one of the items they need to check off. He's asking for a variance for a non-conforming lot to build this deck and 4 seasons rooms with the volume and footprint variance for the numbers that I've just recited. So that's what he's asking for. So I don't have any problem with that. We talked about this back in February. We worked with the petitioner, although the burden is clearly on the petitioner. It is not upon us to come up with these numbers. We worked through these numbers with him, came up with these numbers, put them on a piece of paper for him. Okay, so I'm comfortable with this. I'm comfortable with this variance request for the non-conforming property. Anybody else have anything to say? So if not, I'll ask we can either take a motion to approve this one variance.
I'd like to present some findings and decisions in favor of this, and I'll be quick reading this. Here's copies, Mr. Berman.
Chris. Thank you, Chris.
The request was petitioners request developmental standard for the purpose of constructing a 20 by 20 addition to their deck on the southwest side of the residence and a 20 by 12 foot Four Seasons room on the east side of the residence. The contemplated project involves the alteration and improvement of a non-conforming residential building or other accessory non-conforming structure, resulting in the increases in the footprint of 640 square feet and volume by 240 square feet, all of which is generally impermissible under the section 154.134 of the town's zoning code. Is my sound up good? The Long Beach Advisory Board of Zoning Appeals, after giving due consideration to the petitioner's petition of standard development variance, supporting documents, testimony, and evidence presented during the public hearing on the subject petition, other materials presented to the BZA that are part of the public record, and the legal requirements set forth under the Indiana and Long Beach codes of the BZA now makes the following findings. Number one, the approval of the requested development standard variance from the town's general restriction against permitting the alteration of the petitioner's non-conforming residential building or other accessory non-conforming structure that improves livability or usability by also increases the size of the first floor area and or volume of the building will not be injurious to the public health, safety, morals, and general welfare because of the contemplated project will be constructed in a manner similar to other projects improvements that exist or that have otherwise been allowed in and around the immediate vicinity of the subject property, and all construction will be in compliance with applicable provisions of the town's building code. Number two, the use and value of the area adjacent to the property, subject to the requested developmental standard variance, will not be affected in a substantially adverse manner because the project involves updating and improving the property while maintaining its general compatibility with the character of the immediate neighborhood. Number three, the strict application of the Long Beach zoning code will result in practical difficulties in the use of the subject property for which the development standard variance is sought because the contemplated project, like many throughout the community, involves the alteration or improvement of a non-conforming residential building or other accessory non-conforming structure. As a result of the nonconformance, the petitioners would not otherwise be able to make the contemplated improvements or use and enjoy their property in the same manner as other property owners that are similarly situated without receiving approval for the requested development standard variance. 4, all relief granted by the BZA for the subject petition should be only under section 154.134 of the zoning code, as no other relief from any other sections of property before the BZA for consideration. Based on the foregoing findings, as well as due regard for the requirements of both state and local laws, it is the decision of the BZA to approve and grant the requested standard development variance to allow petitioners to construct a 20 by 20 foot addition to their deck on the southwest side of the residence and a 12 by 20 foot Four Seasons room on the east side of the residence, which will allow the alteration and improvement of a non-conforming residential building or other accessory non-conforming structure, resulting in increases of the footprint by 640 square feet and the volume by 240 square feet, subject to the following determinations and or conditions. Number 1, the standard development variance is granted as relief only from section 154.134 of the zoning code, as petitioners previously withdrew their request for relief from section 154.057. Number 2, no part of these findings and decisions shall be deemed to include any consideration or determination regarding any other sections of the zoning code, including as no relief under any other section was requested of or otherwise properly before the BZA for consideration as part of the subject petition. And number 3, petitioners must obtain all required and applicable permits, including but not limited to a building permit prior to the commencement of any work, all of which shall be based on and subject to the drawings and plans submitted to the BZA for consideration under the petition.
Thank you. Does anybody have any problems or adjustments to this findings and decisions?
No, I would like to make a comment similar to the one I made last month, but.
Is it just a comment on, you're not changing the wording?
No.
But then let me ask for a second.
Okay.
On this thing. So we have a motion. Is there a second for Mr. Jursic? Seconds the motion. Now, open to discussion. Mr. Wicks.
Could we get a microphone on, please?
I don't know. Somebody's got to get a microphone.
Yeah, I'll turn my microphone on, thank you. I don't have an objection to the variance that's written. I do have an observation that I don't see how those things can be accomplished with the drawings that are prepared here. And so I think that when it does go to the building commission, there's going to be other issues that arise, or I fear that there will be. But that's not our job to sort those out. So I just want to mention that again.
Thank you. No, you are quite right. And we need to take a vote. We'll see how that turns out. But if this variance is approved, it's conditioned on getting a building permit. So
I understand.
Mr. Cruz must go back to the building commission to get a building permit so that he complies with all the ordinances with the exception of this one variance. So no other discussion, then I will ask Meg Collins to please call the roll.
Rich Jursic.
Aye.
Barbara Morgan. Doug Wickstrom.
Aye.
Meg Canier.
Aye.
Mike Gorman.
Aye. So this motion passes 5-0. It grants the variance to Mr. Cruz for the non-conforming property. And that closes our public hearing. And at this point, I will ask for a motion to adjourn.
Oh, I'm so moved. Congratulations, Mr. Cruz. That motion to adjourn, please.
That's a little later than that. What time is it? 9:54. We have a motion to adjourn. Who's going to second it? Second by Mr. Jursic. All in favor? Aye. Thank you all for joining us on this Zoom call. One of these days, we'll all be together in the same room again. Thank you.